Tonight's an action-packed blast on HBO starting at 8 with Sylvester Stallone in the premiere of Rambo, First Blood Part 2. Then at 10, Ralph Macchio gets his kicks as the Karate Kid. At 12:10 a.m., catch the gritty moments in training camp. The Bulls are back. There's a knockout fall heading your way tonight and every night on HBO. Tonight, it's comedy, action, and relief. It's Saturday night on HBO. At 8, who you gonna call? Ghostbusters, naturally. Then at 10, get to know Rambo, First Blood Part 2. By 11:45, you'll be ready for some wild, way out comic relief 1. Tonight, a great night. It's Saturday night on HBO. Tonight, HBO and Cinemax have a terrific night for you. On HBO at 8, Ralph Macchio stands out as the Karate Kid. At 10:15, see Thomas Howell and Kelly Preston find fun in Secret Admirer. On Max at 8, Burt Lancaster is the legendary Jim Thorpe. And at 10, the Olympian masterpiece Chariots of Fire. Enjoy the excellence of HBO and Cinemax tonight. Tonight, HBO's Knockout Fall is in full gear. Sylvester Stallone starts the action at 8 in Rambo. Then, It's Not Easy Being Me. At 10, Rodney Dangerfield racks up the laughs in his own HBO comedy special. At 11, Training Camp undergoes a very heavy party. First-rate, all-star entertainment is here tonight on HBO. Tonight's action is hotter than ever on HBO, starting at 9 with Don Johnson in the powerful drama Ceasefire. At 11, it's HBO's exciting up-to-date sports series Inside the NFL. Then at 12 a.m., Sylvester Stallone is Rambo, First Blood Part 2, rough and ready. Catch all the thrills of HBO's All-Star Knockout Night tonight. Tonight, welcome the fun, drama, and music on HBO. First up at 8, it's their first assignment for Police Academy 2. At 9:30, someone's in for a big surprise in training camp. Things are rocking at 10 for an explosive 60s reunion, a joyous celebration with Bill Graham. Come on, enjoy the fun and surprises on HBO tonight. Tonight, hold on to your hats. It's going to be a bumpy night on HBO. Starting at 8 with Robin Williams in his triumphant on-location Night at the Met. Then, double feature madness begins at 9 with Lifeforce, followed by Sting in the classic epic Dune at 11. It's a riotous night, all right, tonight, and it's all on HBO. Tonight, the HBO Halloween Horror Night begins at 8 with Michael J. Fox discovering he's a teen wolf. At 9:30, sexy vampires surface in Transylvania 65000. At 11:15, it's a bone-chilling return of the living dead. Tonight's the night, all right. Halloween night on HBO. Better grab someone quick. Tonight, HBO has a delightful all-star dramatic fantasy for all to enjoy. At 8, it's Cocoon, where the fountain of youth is brimming with surprises. At 10, world leaders suddenly find they're not necessarily the news. At 10:30, Raul Julia scours the Florida Straits for buried gold. Turn to HBO tonight for top-rate TV entertainment. It's a knockout. Tonight, HBO has a surprising night to watch for. First at 8, Sting meets Jennifer Beals, the bride, on the Sunday night movie. Then at 10, Tim McCarver is your host for some of the not-so-great moments in sports. At 11, find love and laughs in No Small Affair. Cap your weekend viewing with fantasy, fun, and fame tonight on HBO. You say you're looking for excitement? Well, tonight, let HBO be your guide. At 8, head off into the wild blue yonder of comedy with Lloyd Bridges in Airplane. At 9:30, not necessarily the news zeroes in on the humorous side of political corruption. Then at 10, it's the action-filled drama Florida Straits. You want it, you got it. Excitement tonight on HBO. Tonight on HBO, we'll show you what it takes to win. At 9, power is the goal of every politician, and Richard Gere is the guy who can help them get it. At 11, Inside the NFL tells you who won or lost and why. Then at 12, you may lose more than your privacy as America Undercover looks at surveillance. It's a winning combination. Tonight on HBO. There's magic tonight on HBO as fun turns to funny right before your eyes. At 8, Steven Spielberg presents The Goonies, kids who bring out the kid in all of us. At 10, it's non-stop laughter at the Young Comedians All-Star Reunion. Then at 11, what you're about to watch is not necessarily television. So remember, for a good time, call HBO tonight. Fair in Love and Lunacy tonight on HBO. At 8, beware the antics of Robert Carradine in Revenge of the Nerds. At 9:30, witness the anguish of life on Nickel Mountain. And at 11, experience the anarchy of breaking all the rules. Revenge, Romance, and The Wrecking Crew tonight on HBO. Tonight on HBO, go from star fields to plain fields. At 7:30, an intergalactic brownout in Rainbow Brite and the Star Stealer. At 9, there's murder with an all-star cast in The Naked Face. At 11, the stars of the gridiron collide inside the NFL. It's a big bang lineup tonight on HBO.
Skelton sees red in an international bout, Rocky IV. At 9:30, it's vengeance against terrorism in Sword of Gideon. At 12:05, Lassie scores a knockout delivered by Bill Cosby himself. The action starts at the sound of the bell tonight on HBO.
Tonight on HBO is a long count on entertainment. At 8, the laughter is brewing and the proof is in beer. At 9:30, catch the news that's funny on purpose, not necessarily the news. And at 10, they come out fighting. World Championship Boxing, Witherspoon versus Smith. Entertainment's the winner and still champion tonight on HBO. Ho, ho, ho! 'Tis the night before Christmas on HBO. At 7, Red Skelton presents Freddie the Freeloader's Christmas Dinner. At 8, the Rockettes kick off Christmas at Radio City Music Hall. And at 9, you better watch out. Down the chimney comes Santa Claus. You'll love the Yuletide tidings tonight on HBO. Comedy for everyone tonight on HBO. At 8, Chevy Chase investigates, infiltrates, and infuriates as Fletch. At 10, Dan Aykroyd joins Chevy in Deep Cover and Deep Snow in Spies Like Us. And at 11:45, Wimps crack the whip in Revenge of the Nerds. Hijinks and low humor tonight on HBO. A fox, a Ford, and a high-grade fever tonight on HBO. At 8, Fangs for the memory of the boy who cried Teen Wolf. At 9:30, Harrison Ford sheds his mosquito netting on the talk show. And at 10, temperatures are rising and pulses are racing at a fever pitch. The fun is infectious and no one's immune tonight on HBO. And comedy come together tonight on HBO. At 8, Tommy Lee Jones races into deadly places in Black Moon Rising. At 10, comic Stephen Wright slays him on location. At 11, Kurt Russell wrestles with a murderer in The Mean Season. The comedy and the thrillers are killers tonight on HBO. Superstar Super Action tonight on HBO and Cinemax. On HBO at 7, a moving look at the King in This Is Elvis. At 9, a spooky peek at Creepshow. On Max at 8, a prison escape in Hard Choices. And at 9:30, Chuck Norris in Missing in Action 2. Tonight's a night you won't want to miss on HBO and Cinemax.
There'll be aerial tricks, shticks, and kicks tonight on HBO. At 8, soar with high-flying action in Iron Eagle. At 10, roar at the high-handed hysteria of humor and the presidency. And at 11, encore for the high-stepping glory of A Chorus Line, the movie. HBO is stepping lively with laughs and supersonic cinema tonight. The High and the Mighty take flight tonight on HBO and Cinemax. On HBO at 8, it's the daring dogfights of Iron Eagle. At 10, the headlines and highlights of humor and the presidency. On Max at 8, it's the strong arm of the law in Code of Silence. And at 10, the long arm of the law in Final Justice. High places and famous faces tonight on HBO and Cinemax. Thumb a ride into terror tonight on HBO. At 10, the startling start of a hitchhiker double feature. At 10:30, the sinister saga continues, giving rise to murderous feelings. And at 11, a freewheeling freelance thief steals the show in Black Moon Rising. It's turbocharged action and hard-driving horror tonight on HBO. It's an experiment in last licks and high kicks tonight on HBO. At 8, Anthony Michael Hall makes a beautiful new friend in Weird Science. At 9:30, the newsmakers make the laughs in Not Necessarily the News. And at 10, one singular sensation, the Broadway smash A Chorus Line, the movie. Fiction, fact, and fancy footwork tonight on HBO. Tonight, HBO is holding Aces High in an award-winning night of entertainment. At 11, this ace winner looks marvelous, and you'll know what we mean. Go on location with Billy Crystal. Don't get me started. And at midnight, winning warbler Patti LaBelle joins Gladys Knight and Dionne Warwick in the song-filled special Sisters in the Name of Love. HBO is holding all the aces, so stay with the winner tonight. Caveman Instincts and Urban Outlaws tonight on HBO. At 8, Daryl Hannah uses sticks and stones to break bones in the Clan of the Cave Bear. At 10, Leslie Ann Warren gives her phone number out once too often in apology. And at 11:40, Central Park is held hostage in The Park Is Mine. You're tuned in to the home of the brave tonight on HBO. Out to the Australian outback tonight on HBO. At 8, winner of 7 Academy Awards, Streep and Redford star in Out of Africa. At 11, a struggle to survive for Rachel Ward in Fortress. At 12:30, move over for On Location, Paul Rodriguez, I Need the Couch. It's a look at love, life, and lunacy tonight on HBO. From the land down under to the African belt tonight on HBO. At 7, Mel's back to play the hero, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. At 9, action under the lights and over the heights tonight on HBO. At 8, Rob Lowe skates through a violent hockey season as young blood. At 10, you've never seen him like this, Bruce Willis, The Return of Bruno. At 11, Detective Sylvester Stallone takes on terrorism in Nighthawks. Sly on a roll and rock and roll on the sly tonight on HBO. It's the sporting life for a gang of good sports tonight on HBO. At 8, Rob Lowe skates through a violent hockey season as Youngblood. At 10, Goldie Hawn takes a hike and tackles coaching, Wildcats. At 11:50, it's a look at the 19th century life of the boy in blue. Athletic adventures past and present tonight on HBO. Murder, madness, and madcap adventure tonight on HBO. At 8, Freddy's Dead, but not forgotten in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. At 9:30, move over for On Location, Paul Rodriguez, I Need the Couch. And at 10:30, go from romance to rescue in The Jewel of the Nile, mayhem, mugs, and globe-trotting thugs tonight on HBO. Go from the force to the farce tonight on HBO and Cinemax. On HBO at 7, the saga continues. Return of the Jedi. At 9:30, On Location with Bob Goldthwait. Share the warmth. On Max at 8, Nicholson and Turner make a hit. Preetsy's Honor. At 10:15, A Messiah in a Bottle. The Gods Must Be Crazy. Heroes, Heroines, and Houston tonight on HBO and Cinemax. Stinging punchlines and staggering punches tonight on HBO. At 7:30, it's the nuts with all the news that's fit to be funny, not necessarily the news. At 8, Sean Connery gives lessons in immortality. Highlander. At 10, live at the sound of the bell, Mike Tyson versus James Bone Crusher Smith. Get a ringside seat for entertainment tonight on HBO. Tale Jaws. At 10:05, Julie Andrews bears all in Blake Edwards' S.O.B. At 12:10, you're off on the road to the super fight. It's Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Sugar Ray Leonard. You get a ringside seat for fun tonight on HBO. Starts with a trip through time tonight on HBO. At 8, Michael J. Fox races through the paths to try to get back to the future. At 10, she sings out in the entertainment event of the year, Barbra Streisand, One Voice. At 11:05, a 12-year-old student in a strange land, Lucas, a gift of song and a gifted child tonight on HBO. One Voice. On Max at 8, Liza Minnelli tries to hang on in the sterile Cocoon. At 10, Tom Hanks and Shelley Long repair to the money pit. Riffs, tiffs, and marital bliss tonight on HBO and Cinemax.
It's Lethal Ladies and lots of laughter tonight on HBO. At 10, she kills to settle an old score on The Hitchhiker in the Name of Love. At 10:30, all the late-breaking laughs with not necessarily the news. At 11, Michael J. Fox races through the past to try to get back to the future. Forward into the past, it's Love on the Rocks tonight on HBO. Contact Sports and Contract Killers tonight on HBO. At 8, they come out fighting at the sound of the bell. Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Sugar Ray Leonard. At 9:30, Sly sees red in A Bout for Freedom, Rocky IV. At 11, she's a professional killer with a particular specialty on The Hitchhiker. A hardened hit woman and hard-hitting men tonight on HBO. Dating Rights and Hollywood Nights tonight on HBO. At 7:30, it's teenage heartache and heartbreak with 7 Minutes in Heaven. At 9, Goodbye Good Taste, hello outrageous comedy. Here come the Hollywood Nights. At 10:30, cold-blooded killers are made for each other on The Hitchhiker. Hitch a ride to heaven and Hollywood tonight on HBO. V for Victory, Vocals and Vice tonight on HBO. At 8, Linda Ronstadt performs in concert with the Nelson Riddle Orchestra. At 9, it's The Agony of Defeat, Greatest Sports Upsets. At 10, a practical joker may not get the last laugh on The Hitchhiker. Nightingales, Turkeys, and Sitting Ducks tonight on HBO. High notes, hijinks, and low comedy tonight on HBO. At 8, 3 great ladies of song swing into harmony. They're sisters in the Name of Love. At 9, Tom Hanks and Shelley Long sink their savings into the money pit. At 10:30, Goodbye Good Taste, here come the Hollywood Nights. Music, mayhem, and the monthly mortgage tonight on HBO. It's Harmony and Homicide tonight on HBO. At 8, the entertainment event of the year, Barbra Streisand, One Voice. At 9:05, eccentric scientist Peter O'Toole plays Creator. At 11, lawyer Ed Harris compromises his conscience in The Last Innocent Man. Class acts and class clones tonight on HBO. And the rowdy robot is running amok in Short Circuit. At 10, off-the-cuff humor is just a sketch. On location, Uptown Comedy Express. At 11, the recipe calls for fear on The Hitchhiker. Drop-dead terror and stand-up humor tonight on HBO.
ghostly specters and the specter of war tonight on HBO. At 8, they're back and putting the Freelings through hell. Poltergeist 2, The Other Side. At 9:30, love, war, and the 1940s proved to be fertile ground in Desert Bloom. At 11:30, thumb a ride into terror with a hitchhiker. Twists of Fate and Fatal Twists tonight on HBO. A toothy grin and a roll of the dice on HBO. At 9, a stripper puts the bite on a fraternity. Grace Jones is vamped. At 11, the lunacy begins. A high school reunion run. A triple bill of revenge tonight on HBO. At 9, a reformed hooker returns to the streets to find a cop killer in Avenging Angel. At 10:30, a rape victim takes the law into her own hands in Sudden Death. At 12:10, long-distance runners face terror in the suspense-filled Raw Courage. From LA to New York, it's all-out action on HBO. Rambo, Roulette, and Revenge tonight on HBO. At 9, Sly Stallone rescues his fellow Americans in Rambo, First Blood Part 2. At 11, the lunacy continues as the boys make Vegas crazy in Glory Years Act 2. At 11:30, a rape victim seeks justice in the streets in Sudden Death. A hair-raising rescue and a hair-brained reunion tonight on HBO. Double action and triple plays tonight on HBO. At 8, Chuck Norris KOs the bad guys as Lone Wolf McQuaid. At 10, Chuck returns to stop a mad doctor in Silent Rage. At 11:45, a minor league team has major league ambitions in the HBO Pictures presentation Long Gone. It's knockouts and strikeouts tonight on HBO. Nuclear Secrets and Secret Societies tonight on HBO. At 7, John Lithgow searches for an atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project. At 9, Sly Stallone deals death to the demented as the hard-hitting Cobra. At 10:30, the lunacy continues with a mad weekend in Vegas. Glory Years Act 2. Government, Guns, and Glory tonight on HBO. Guns, Glory, and Gangsters tonight on HBO. At 9, Sly Stallone deals death to the demented as the fast-drawing Cobra. At 10:30, the lunacy continues with a mad trek to Vegas on Glory Years Act 2. At 11, Kathleen Turner and Jack Nicholson make a hit in John Huston's Preetsy's Honor. Stallone strikes and Jack's back tonight on HBO. Have another cookie, my dear. Poor Passengers and Bad Drivers tonight on HBO. At 9, C. Thomas Howell should have listened to his mom and passed on Rutger Hauer as the hitcher. At 11, he's witty and wild. On location, Robin Williams in Evening at the Met. At 12:05, find fun behind the wheel of Traffic School in Moving Violations. Keep your eyes on the road tonight on HBO. A little traveling music maestro tonight on HBO. At 7, H.G. Wells and Jack the Ripper tango to the tune of Time After Time. At 9, the cosmic cast of Cocoon proves to be among the very young at heart. At 11, Sigourney Weaver struts to the strains of a reptilian rhapsody, Aliens. Songs from long ago and far away tonight on HBO. Little Women and Big Trouble tonight on HBO. At 7:30, Boys Just Want Girls and Girls Just Want to Have Fun. At 9, Kurt Russell upsets the rickshaw when he gets involved in Big Trouble in Little China. At 11, it's Girls' Night Out with a quartet of today's hottest comedians. On location, Women of the Night. New wave comedy and ancient Chinese secrets tonight on HBO. The Cup, On the Trail, and On the Lam tonight on HBO. At 7:30, Wisdom from the Mouths of Babes. Kids on Kids on Kids. At 8, Philip Marlowe, Private Eye, tracks down Public Enemy #1. At 9, Teenage Rebel with a Cause. The Legend of Billie Jean. It's a legendary night of entertainment right here on... Western welcomes an Eastern intrigue tonight on HBO. At 9, it's The Glory of Love, The Karate Kid Part 2. At 11, another look at the superstar salute to Vietnam veterans, Welcome Home Encore. At 12:30, Kurt Russell upsets the rickshaw and winds up with Big Trouble in Little China. Entertainment Oriental, and that's no accident, tonight on HBO. Musical riffs and suburban riffraff tonight on HBO. At 8, Don Johnson's music video feature Heartbeat. At 9, Ralph Macchio sounds a soulful chord down at the crossroads. At 11, HBO Comedy Hour, Martin Mull from North Ridgeville, Ohio. The Bland, the Band, and the handheld camera tonight on HBO. Battle Fatigue and Bottle Fatigue tonight on HBO. At 9, it's Eccentricity versus Ecology, A Breed Apart. At 10:30, True Life Trials, the HBO Showcase Vietnam War story, The Mine. At 11, what's this? A Messiah in a Bottle? The gods must be crazy. Heavens Above and Hell on Earth tonight on HBO.
Trouble in Mind, Body, and Soul tonight on HBO. At 8, Vet Tommy Lee Jones claims the park is mine from HBO Pictures. At 10, the Bulls are back. First and 10 going for broke. At 10:30, lawyer Glenn Close defends Jeff Bridges on the point of a jagged edge. The Hostage, The Huddle, and The Hung Jury tonight on HBO.
The Legal, The Regal, and Sigourney Weaver tonight on HBO. At 8, Daryl gets her best defense from Winger and Redford as Legal Eagles. At 10, HBO World Stage, the second annual Prince's Trust All-Star Rock Concert. At 11:15, Horror and Hardware in Outer Space, Aliens, Sex, Bugs, and Rock and Roll tonight on HBO. Over the Top and Inside the NFL tonight on HBO. At 9, Alien Cooties stalk All-American Cuties, Night of the Creeps. At 10:30, HBO Showcase Vietnam War story, Home. At 11, Teams, Tackles, and Touchdowns on Inside the NFL. Combat, Contact, and Carnivorous Critters tonight on HBO. The Housefly and the Housefrau tonight on HBO. At 8, A Genius Changes Genus. Jeff Goldblum is The Fly. At 10, America's favorite domestic goddess. On location, The Roseanne Barr Show. At 11, Richard Pryor ignites JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling. A bundle of bar and a brundle of fly tonight on HBO. A Man on the Run and a Fly on the Wall tonight on HBO. At 9, Anthony Michael Hall is in the LA drug scene, out of luck and out of bounds. At 10:30, Lowe and Moore have met and made it, but they're still wondering about last night. At 12:25, a genius accidentally changes his genus. Jeff Goldblum stars as The Fly. Trifling affections and troubling afflictions tonight on HBO. Police Academy 3 is back in training. At 11:30, Pacino raises objections when the legal system gets out of order and justice for all. Confrontation and Pigmentation tonight on HBO.
Murder, music, and monkey business tonight on HBO. At 8, Clint and Clyde will turn you every which way but loose. At 10, the HBO World Stage, Billy Joel from Leningrad, USSR. At 11, Jeff Bridges battles booze, bitterness, and the bad guy, 8 Million Ways to Die. Sin, Soviets, and Simian Silliness tonight on HBO.
Hackers, Hikers, and Humorists tonight on HBO. At 9, Whoopi Goldberg is up to her dreadlocks in danger. Jumpin' Jack Flash. At 11, the Bulls are back and on the brink of death. First and 10 going for broke. At 11:30, John LaRoquette takes you on location for the 11th annual Young Comedian Show. Comics, Computers, and California Bulls tonight on HBO. Liftoff, Libel, and Laughter tonight on HBO and Cinemax. On HBO at 9, fasten your seatbelts for Airplane. At 10:30, it's the HBO Comedy Hour, Joe Piscopo live from UCLA. On Max today, Paul Newman is Rightfully Wronged, Absence of Malice. At 10, the loves, lies, and laughs of Hannah and her sisters. The Sinister, the Sisterly, and the Supersonic on HBO and Cinemax.
The Bite, and the Balalaika tonight on HBO. At 8, a musical exclusive on the HBO World Stage. Billy Joel from Leningrad, USSR. At 9, where there's laughter, there's hope for the homeless. Comic Relief 87 live. At 12:30, it's A Dog's Life for Man's Best Friend on The Hitchhiker. Killer Canines and Canny Comics tonight on HBO.
The Boxer and the Bobby Soxer tonight on HBO. At 8, Kathleen Turner trips through the past to relive the time Peggy Sue got married. At 10, World Championship Boxing. Edwin Rosario versus Julio Cesar Chavez live. At 11:30, The Dark of the Night. 2 savage slayings. HBO Pictures presents Laguna Heat. Heatniks and Beatniks tonight on HBO.
Fall in for a night of great entertainment tonight on HBO. At 8, Eastwood, a tough commander in charge of military misfits, Heartbreak Ridge. At 10:15, star-studded stand-up on location with Paul Reiser, out on a whim. At 11:30, Michael Keaton changes his goal from scoring to love, touch and go. More fun than you can shake a hockey stick at tonight on HBO.
Sugar and Spice and Everything Vice tonight on HBO. At 8, Kathleen Turner takes a trip through the past to relive the time Peggy Sue got married. At 10, In the Dark of the Night, 2 brutal slayings, Laguna Heat from HBO Pictures. At 11:55, sex, drugs, and gambling are all in a night's beat for the Hollywood Vice Squad. It's a happy night of heartache and homicide on HBO.
The Mouth That Roars and the Powers That Be tonight on HBO. At 8, an ex-cop infiltrates a cult of crime and corruption. HBO Pictures Into the Homeland. At 10, a riotous return. On location, Buddy Hackett 2 on stage at Caesars Atlantic City. At 11, Tom Hanks and Shelley Long take a mortgage on a monster, The Money Pit. Rural racism, risque remarks, and risky real estate tonight on HBO. The Bad, the Bawd, and the Beautiful tonight on HBO. At 9, a hotshot kid and an Air Force pilot fly a rescue raid in the Middle East, Iron Eagle. At 11, the Divine Miss M caught live and in concert, Bette Midler, Divine Madness. At 12:35, a bizarre bequest gets the best of 2 bachelor brothers, Malibu Bikini Shop. The Daring, the Decadent, and the Divine tonight on HBO. The Powers and the Glory tonight on HBO. At 8, an ex-cop infiltrates a cult of crime and corruption on HBO Pictures Into the Homeland. At 10, the Bulls are back and taking long calls on First and 10 Going for Broke. At 10:30, anything can happen. HBO Comedy Hour live. Robert Townsend and his partners in crime. You'll have the crime of your life tonight on HBO. The naughty night of New Year's Eve last laughs continues right here on HBO. At 11, it's The Great Homewrecker, The Roseanne Barr Show. At midnight, share the lunacy with Bob Goldthwait. Share the warmth. At 1, stay on location with Jerry Seinfeld, Stand Up Confidential. At 2, he's caustic and controversial. On location, Sam Kinison. Ring out the old and ring in the new tonight on HBO. Treasure hunts and pleasure hunts tonight on HBO. At 8, Indy's back to mine a load of underground adventure. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. At 10, love, laughter, and lively adventure as Turner and Douglas search for the Jewel of the Nile. At 11:50, the HBO Comedy Hour live. Robert Townsend and his partners in crime. Rogues, romance, and rousing rescues right here on HBO. Up-tempo action and a note of discord on HBO and Cinemax. On HBO at 9, Sly terrorizes a band of urban terrorists in Cobra. At 10:30, the Bulls are back in First and 10 Going for Broke. On Max at 9, Cinemax Sessions, Roy Orbison and Friends, A Black and White Night. At 10, Journey into Madness, Descent into Hell, Apocalypse Now. Action, Song, and the Viet Cong on HBO and Cinemax.
star-crossed lovers and bosom buddies tonight on HBO. At 8, dour delinquents hit the open road to hell armed with six-shooters and very little wisdom. At 10, America Undercover, Murder or Mercy, 5 American families. At 11, Bergen and Bissett are best of friends through the best of times and the bittersweet, rich and famous. The famous and the infamous tonight on HBO. They're going man-to-man and hand-to-hand tonight on HBO. At 10, World Championship Boxing, Tyson versus Holmes live. At 11:30, the Bulls are back in style. 1st and 10 going for broke. At midnight, Crime's the Disease and Stallone's The Cure. Cobra. At 1:30, Sly's an avid arm wrestler eager to go over the top. Flailing fists and failing wrists tonight on HBO. Anguished mother or artful murderess, Joe Clayburgh stars in Where Are the Children? Murphy, Mirth, and Maternal Instincts tonight on HBO. Killer Cooties and Semi-Clad Cuties tonight on HBO. At 8, Horror and Hardware. Sigourney Weaver battles intergalactic ghoulies in Aliens. At 10:30, a vicious, viscous villain vanquishes victims with a venal volume of vile bile, The Kindred. At 12:05, All-American Boys chase nubile nymphs in Hard Bodies 2. Prime Time and Slime Time tonight on HBO. The Antic, the Airborne, and the Amorous tonight on HBO. At 10, lots of laughs, but no respect. On location, Rodney Dangerfield, Nothing Goes Right. At 11, the ABCs of Coffee, Tea, or Me. Classes in session at Stewardess School. At 12:30, All-American Boys chase nubile nymphs across the beaches of Greece. Hard Bodies 2. Musclebound Bodies and Skybound Beauties tonight on HBO. Oscar hopefuls and best bets tonight on HBO. At 9:30, a celluloid look at the odds-on favorites in the race for the Oscars. HBO Entertainment News. At 10, when he appears, strange things happen. Thumb a ride into terror with The Hitchhiker. At 10:30, Variety is the spice of life when you enter the splashy, flashy, trashy world of Bette Midler's Mondo Beyond-O. Showbiz Flash and the Queen of Trash tonight on HBO. A Drunken Days and Sleepless Nights right here on HBO. At 8, You Can't Keep a Good Fiend Down. Freddy's Ready. A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. Dream Warriors. At 10, when he appears, strange things happen. Thumb a ride into terror with The Hitchhiker. At 10:30, Jane Fonda has a sobering experience when she wakes to a hangover and a homicide. The Morning After. The Inebriate and the Insomniac tonight on HBO. Buzzwords right here on HBO. At 9, lovely Leslie Ann Warren swings with Peter Coyote and sings with Willie Nelson in Baja, Oklahoma. At 11, a candidate with character. Plunge into the presidential primary in Tanner 88, the Dark Horse. At midnight, the trials of teleportation. Jeff Goldblum gets his chromosomes crossed with The Fly. Party politics and pesticides tonight on HBO. High Voltage Heroes and Hungry Housewives tonight on HBO. At 7:15, Sly goes from fists to wrists in his quest for the arm wrestling championship over the top. At 9, the heat is on the streets. Mel and Danny vie with the vicious and the violent Lethal Weapon. At 11, sing those house-proud blues with America's favorite domestic goddess. On location, the Roseanne Barr Show. Spend a night with a hothead and the well-fed right here on HBO. To Ruin and the Highway to Hell tonight on HBO. At 8, The Birth of the Blues. An aging guitarist makes a devilish deal at the crossroads. At 10, when he appears, strange things happen. Thumb a ride into terror with a hitchhiker. At 10:30, the heat is on the street. Mel and Danny vie with the vicious and the violent in Lethal Weapon. A night of guitars, guns, Gibson, and Glover right here on HBO. Days of Old and Streets of Gold, tonight on HBO. At 7, Michael J. Fox blasts into the past with a helping hand from Crazy Christopher, Back to the Future. At 9, The Turf is Tough for a Russian boxer who'd rather fight than switch, Streets of Gold. At 10:30, Capital Capers from a caustic comic. On location, Dennis Miller. Mr. Miller goes to Washington. It's a night of politics and pugilists, right here on HBO. Music, Monkeys, and Mutants, tonight on HBO. At 8, he's half human, half animal. The sensitive story of Rat Boy. At 10, menacing military monkey business has Matthew in a simian quandary. Project X. At 11:50, The Birth of the Blues. An aging guitarist makes a devilish deal at the crossroads. A night of rhythm, research, and rodents, right here on HBO. Music, Monkeys, and Mutants, tonight on HBO. At 8, he's half human, half animal. The sensitive story of Rat Boy. At 10, menacing military monkey business has Matthew in a simian quandary. Project X. At 11:50, the...
Get set for a night of law and disorder right here on HBO. At 7:30, they're swearing out warrants and swearing in civilians in Police Academy 4's Citizens on Patrol. At 9, Jack and Julie strive to survive a high-anxiety birthday in Blake Edwards' That's Life. At 11, a family faces the fear and fury of a terrible tragedy. They're ordinary people. A searing celluloid night of entertainment right here on HBO. A night of end zones and erogenous zones right here on HBO. At 8, Kim has one too many and Bruce has a night to remember. Blind Date. At 9:45, Lowe and Moore struggle to turn a modern romance into a meaningful relationship. About Last Night. At 11:40, Goldie takes to the field to tackle coaching. Wildcats. The home team scores with great entertainment tonight on HBO. A night of Havoc and Hackett right here on HBO. At 8, Nick Nolte's a righteous ranger dealing death to ruthless renegades with extreme prejudice. At 10, go on location for Buddy Hackett 2 on stage at Caesars Atlantic City. At 11, Michael J. Fox climbs the corporate ladder any which way he can in The Secret of My Success. The hyperactive and the hyper-violent tonight on HBO. Hot Wax and Hot Wheels tonight on HBO. At 8, Atlantic Records' 40th anniversary. It's only rock and roll. At midnight, Rodney's out to make the grade and make the professor when he heads back to school. At 1:40, they're ready, willing, and definitely able-bodied. Hand over your keys to the Valet Girls. A night of cruising, crooning, and cramming tonight on HBO. A night of politics and pugilists right here on HBO. At 10, elite elbow rubbing and a Tinseltown triumph. 10 or 88, Child's Play. At 10:30, an in-depth look at a long-awaited heavyweight bout. Countdown to Tyson Spinks. At 11:30, a hooker and a smuggler find themselves in danger and in love. Clinton and Nadine. Danger on the run and in the ring. Tonight on HBO. The War-Torn and the Side-Splitting, tonight on HBO. At 8, in World War II Japan, an American POW finds forbidden love. Captive Hearts. At 10, the distaff side of daffiness. On location, Women of the Night 2. At 11, that's what friends are for. Mark Harmon's buddies to the rescue in Let's Get Harry. Captive Hearts and Captive Harry, tonight on HBO. Accusations and Allegations, tonight on HBO. At 8, anguished mother or artful murderess, Jill Clayburgh stars in Where Are the Children? At 10, an unprecedented international television event, HBO Showcase, Balltime, a commission of inquiry. At 12:30, Rob Lowe skates his way through a violent hockey season as Youngblood. A ringside seat for great entertainment, tonight on HBO. Law is in effect on HBO and Cinemax.
A super night for some super dudes tonight on HBO. At 8, it's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. At 9:30, hypochondria becomes hilarious. On location, Richard Lewis, I'm exhausted. At 10:30, Jack struggles to keep his campaign afloat in his continued bid for the Oval Office. Tanner 88, The Great Escape. A landslide vote for great entertainment tonight on HBO. In a Frenzy and in the Fray tonight on HBO. At 7, Jackie Gleason, Tom Hanks, father and son with nothing in common. At 9, a raucous reunion is really a rally for re-election. Morgan Stewart's coming home. At 10:30, Jack struggles to keep his footing on the rugged campaign trail. Tanner 88, The Great Escape. A landslide vote for great entertainment tonight on HBO.
Flesh Peddlers and Flesh Meddlers tonight on HBO. At 8, he's judge, jury, and executioner, and he's taking no prisoners. Instant justice. At 10, you've got a ringside seat for a World Championship boxing doubleheader. At midnight, frantic fast food and high-cal hijinks. Plenty of beef and buns to go in Hamburger the Motion Picture. Entertainment on a roll tonight on HBO. The Splashed and the Splattered on HBO and Cinemax. On HBO at 9, Freddy's back for A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. At 10:30, The Fight is on. A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors. On Max at 9, Michael's a crummy con man caught in the squeeze. At 11, Love is a Little Fishy for Tom and Daryl in Splash. Action underwater and under the covers on HBO and Cinemax. Twisted, Enlisted, and Two-Fisted on HBO and Cinemax. On HBO at 9, Party All Night, Never Grow Old. It's great to be a vampire. The Lost Boys. At 11, go on location with Paul Reiser, Out on a Whim. On Max at 10, Bill Murray declares war on the Army in Stripes. At 11:50, the Prince of the City is back with a plan to stick it to the man, Superfly. Fist in face, tongue in cheek, teeth in neck on HBO and Cinemax.